I'm going to be using this background, which is one of the new fresh floral ones. I've found a reference image that I'm going to actually take as a raw image. So this is the raw image I'm going to bring into this one. The reason I picked this one, this is how I would shoot for this particular setup where I have a similar background with colors and tones, because I find this the easiest way to composite. So I'm looking at things here as well when I'm reviewing the image. This is going to require a bit of editing around here because there's a white layer there, and I know that when it goes into the background it's going to have a little bit of work and make sure that it's believable. So I'll bring the image across. Basically then I just resize. Sometimes you can resize by using the opacity layer, so I might do that. I don't often do that, but sometimes you can do that just to see how large the subject is compared to where it's going. So I think that'll be a good start, and then I'll bring it back up in opacity. I place a mask over that, and then I invert the mask. I've got now the opportunity to come back in with my black and white brushes too, and this is where all the work is done. So I'm going to come in with an 100% opacity white brush, and that's how I'm going to bring my subject in and allow me to paint out, in and out, as I'm blending her into the background. So I know that I want to actually come up around all the edges, so that then I'll come back in with the black brush to make sure I take out exactly the edge that I can't keep in the image. So I come up around here, and then that way I know where I can blend out to. So I know I can't have any of those flowers in. So I'm going to come in nice and close now with the black brush. And basically I'm just going to erase all the parts that I don't really want. I know that I don't want in my blend. So all of these parts here, I know this is just a rough edit before I start to blend. So I don't want any of those flowers as part of the shadows or anything. So what I might do is just come in close to here. Save myself coming in back and doing it later. So definitely don't want any of that floral stuff there that's in the original image. Come back with a bigger brush to get rid of all this. That means I just blend from where I've taken that out now, and I just use my brushes. So you can see that that's a similar kind of fluff there. So what I do is do this. I erase back all the parts that I definitely don't want in my image, and then I'll just resize her as to fit appropriately, and make sure her head's in the right position so that I know what is behind her head. I know that I'm going to get the result that I want with a bit of editing. So I've got I just keep getting smaller and smaller brushes so that it just is easier to edit around the edge there. So you can see, I can see that when I bring in my dodge and burn layer, I'm going to be able to build that in nice and dark. So it's kind of around that darkness. Whoops. So I know that the shadow around her head, this is where she was originally in fluff. So I'm going to try and create a shadow that's going to match what was originally there, because that is what happens with shadows. If she's actually in a nest, a scenario where she has a head surrounded by things, she's going to throw a lot of shadows. So that's what I then have to create. So I've got that edge there of her hair. Sometimes I just like to make sure that that looks nice and sharp. So it's looking pretty good. And I know I'm going to come fix that edge later, but I've got all the parts out that I really don't want it. So I'm looking around my edges here. So now I'm going to go back out and then just get I'm going to resize her by Control T, holding my Shift key. So what I'm looking for is making sure that a lot of those edges are covered by the fluff. And I'm happy with her head coming above the fluff there, up the top. I know I can shadow behind that, but I want to make sure that all the edges of this part here, they're all surrounded by fluff, because I know I can edit that nicely if I've got that. And I want her nice and centered So I'm happy with that size. I'll just move her around just so she's right in the center. And I know I'm going to put a bit of a shadow there. You can see that, and I'm going to blend that away a little bit. So what I go back to my subject with my black and white brushes now, and I'll get my black brush. I'll take that right down to a very low opacity, and basically this is just painting. So there's no exact science to this. I also like to follow edges. So with this one, it's at 10%. So what I know is this is here. I can also check where by coming in here, and then I can just check with that to see where I have the original image to work with. So I might say, okay, I know I've got that amount of editing area to blend. So I'll just come in and I'm taking 10% away here. So I'm just going to basically reduce and paint away. So from the edges, you can see, and when you put this, you can see how I faded that out from the edge. So from here, I want to then bring that in. So sometimes I'll just erase around the natural flow of some of the felt. So see how there's a little shadow there. So I might just enhance that natural shadow. That needs to have a shadow under there. So we're just going to make sure we don't lose that. So this is where I guess I say it's the artistry comes in, because you've got to develop an eye for seeing different shapes. And so for me, I'm just trying to follow different shapes as I'm erasing out, so that you're starting to get that natural shape. So you can see how I'm using curved movements to get rid of it, so that when you are taking away the opacity, it's not in straight lines, it's really just a blend. So just keeping on taking some of those edges. Now what I want to do is I'll probably add a shadow under here. So that's looking good along that edge there. I'm happy with how that's looking there as well. It's like the tone range and the colour, the shadowing is looking good. So I'm still on my 10%, and I've got to do a bit of work on this part here. So I'll just take this away here a bit, because I want to make these match. So I'll take away that harsh edge. Just get a bigger brush and reduce that again, because I'll make sure that shadow's not too dark. So I'm getting to that place where I feel like I'm quite happy with how the blend is around the edges, and now it's really just a matter of getting a few shadows working in here. That's a bit dark there. Sometimes I like to just lift the dark areas, because I know that there's a lighter green fluff underneath, so I'll just use the fact that I've got a layer over the top and just lift some of those dark spots with the opacity. So that means I know that I've got light green underneath, so that's all that's underneath. So basically what I want to do is work on her head area here now with putting in a dodge and burn layer. So I go to layer, new fill layer, solid color, fill with, I do soft light. That's okay. It's not, that was not right. Let's try that again. Layer, new fill layer. New layer, I just did the wrong thing. So there we go, soft light, fill with neutral grey. Okay, so there's my dodge and burn layer there, sorry. And basically I use that underneath. So you can see how that dodge and burn layer is underneath my subject. So that means when I'm coming in with my 10% of my dodge and burn, because what I do is work up. So I start at 10%, and in that way you can just use your brush to build on it. So what I'm trying to do now is create the natural shadow that would fall behind her head to match. So you can see how now I'm matching that part around her head nicely now. So I've got, that's getting nice and even. It's a little bit, let me have a look. It's a little bit dark just there. So sometimes what I do is if I've got that, I might just erase that dark spot rather than going back out. So I could just fill that back up with something else. So I will get my my burn again. So this is where I'm just burning in some shadow. So it's underneath that layer. So I'm going to put a shadow. See how just along that wrap line there, there's a shadow. So I want to just create that. So it's not going on the top layer. It's just going on underneath that wrap. So this is also, I just want to make sure I've got a nice blend of the shadows coming out from the edges. So that's coming underneath. I think I'm almost done with the shadows that I want underneath. These are coming around the edges now, so I'm happy with that. What I sometimes do is just come out from the image and then see how it's looking. I'm feeling that the shadows are looking pretty believable. So now I will go and put a dodge and burn layer on the top. This is, I've actually got a quick dodge and burn layer, so I won't, that's why I've gotten into the habit of just clicking that. I just set it up in actions. So what I want to do now is I've got my 10% my burn tool again. So I'm just going to burn in some areas here just so that I don't have highlights that are too highlighted. And then I can again lift some of the shadows by going to my white brush. So I can lift some of these dark spots. I don't like really light spots and then really dark spots because that's what draws your eye to particular areas. So sometimes I might lighten up that little dark spot there just so that it doesn't overpower the image too much. So I'm kind of happy with how she's looking at the moment. I obviously try not to overwork too much. I do like the dodge and burn because this is how in my work you create a three-dimensional feel. And this is how I can, so say this has nothing to do with the composite, but I might just enhance the shadow around here so it feels a bit more three-dimensional. And that's kind of makes her pop a little bit out of the image if she's got that nice feeling of depth. So you can see how the shadows are just, will give her, I'll turn it on and off. So you can see that there. But it's looking nice, nice and together. So what I'll probably do now is just do one last check, make sure I'm happy with how that's all looking, and make sure by doing my backspace I haven't missed anything. So I've got a few bits that I've missed there, so I'm going to take my black brush at 100% and erase those bits that I've obviously missed along here. They're all part of the blend, but I want to get rid of any little bits and pieces that are hanging around the edges in here, so I can see that, so I'll take that off. So now what I'll do is if I'm 100% happy, I'll just do my basic edit on the baby. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to flatten my image now, and then I create a new layer. This is where I do my skin retouch. Now she's got quite blotchy skin, so this is what I use, my patch tool, and I'll go in nice and tight. Get rid of some of those little spots. I've always used the patch tool. I started with the spot healing brush or something about four years ago, but I do love the patch because just for me, I just like the control that suits the way I edit. I like to be able to control where I'm patching. There's no surprises. Generally, there's no surprises. If you use the patch tool a certain way, you can kind of choose the texture that you're replacing it with. That's the other thing that I like, the fact that you can choose the texture. Sometimes you'll edit and then with the other tools and it just won't bring the texture across the way you like it. So what I then do with this one, I then do my eye socket if it's a bit dark, and then I'll fade patch tool select. I'll take that back like that. So basically you can see that there's a bit of a there. So I obviously try not to make babies look too perfect, but I will take things that are really obvious and then I'll fade that again. I'll just fade that so it's still there, but it's just not as dramatic. I just say to parents that I just try to take things away a little bit so it's not distracting. And that's probably where I'm at with, that's what I would normally do. sometimes I need to look at the watch because I do tend to take a lot of time to edit. So then so what I'll do now is come back out, see if I can see some spots and things I might just change. So I'll flatten that again. Then I've actually got, I've built in layers that allow me to do my hand editing. I'm just going to quickly, there's little bits of fluff here that I'll get rid of that I find distracting. So I'll get rid of those with the patch tool again. I like the way, the patch tool replaces the texture that I choose. So any other bits under the hair there? I try to, I describe my editing like I'll get all the boring stuff out of the way, like I'm eating my vegetable first. I get all of the skin work done up front because it's the bit that takes the time, and then the fun bit is all the last bits of editing. So I'll flatten that. I'll build it. I have a build that basically gives me all the layers to edit, so I'll explain what they are, but they it just reduces my workflow, I should say. So I've got a color balance layer that basically the way I like to warm up the shadows. So with this color balance layer, if an image has a lot of green, I will then just paint back in because it basically brings in the warmth and the shadows. So what I do is I mask it off and then I paint it back in on the warmer areas because it's a bit quicker, because I tend to take it off the green. So if an image has more green, then I will just take it off there. So I'm just painting it back in the warmer tones there, so that I don't want any of the color balance layer that I normally do to come in on the green. You can see that warmth has come back in because I like green to stay green, so that my color balance layer has a lot of warmth. So what I'll then do is I've got an exposure adjust layer. It's just, again, it's all my little shortcuts. So I've built this action in myself to just adjust the exposure. So I want to just balance out that exposure on the side of the head, just because I want to give it a bit more of a flat. I've got the shadows there, but I just want to lift that bit there so that it doesn't mismatch the backdrop too much. So I'm just lifting that tiny bit on the side of the head. I also want to warm up her shadows a bit more, so I do a color balance layer. I'm just going to warm up, put a bit more warmth in the shadows and mid-tones, and I mask that off and then I paint it back in where I feel like there needs to be a bit more warmth. So I'm just going to paint some in the shadows here. I'm going to lift that with my dodgers, but I'm going to come back and do a bit more. This is not something that I would do on every single image. I'm just spending probably the most amount of time on this one. My editing is a bit quicker than this, but this is just because I'm trying to do. So I'll turn that on and off, and you can see the warmth coming back into those shadows. Now I'm going to do a bit of fine tuning with the dodge and burn. Again, these are tiny little things that I do just to make my images pop. So I've got my my dodge tool. I say it's dodge because it's not the dodge and burn tool, it's actually the dodge and burn layer. So I'm just putting a little bit of a highlight on those lips, and I'm going to lift. What I also do with my dodge and burn layer, it's my way of enhancing the three-dimensional parts of an image. So I'm just going to keep her nice bridge line nice and even, and with an eye socket there, what I tend to do is you want the eye to look round. So if you pop a little bit of light, so basically your dodge and burn layer is enhancing and decreasing light. So I'm enhancing the light that's hitting the top of her eye there. And any of the shadows that I feel like are a little bit dark. So there's a big shadow there. So I just want to make her eye look like it's very round, and we've got some light hitting those areas where light would normally highlight on her lips there. So it's a little bit of a highlight there. I'm being very pedantic, so that I can move that back a bit. So the other thing I do is just sometimes, like I said, enhance and the light. So here I'm just going to enhance her eye line. It's also a way that if you've got little gaps in their eye line, you can just fill those up with the burn tool, or the burn layer. So I'm just giving her a bit more, I'm increasing the contrast too between these things. So it's not about painting something that wasn't there, I'm just enhancing that line. So that will make her eyes pop a little bit more. So I'll put that there so you can see the contrast there. I'm going to bring that down. So this layer too, I can just lift some of that part there that was still a bit of a mark on the top of her eye, but you can lift it with the dodge and burn tool. So there. Lift some of those areas there. Still a little bit there. So now, I think we're just about getting there. She's looking good. All right, so then I will generally, sometimes I pop in, I've got to correct the blue layer as well. I don't think I'm seeing too much blue, but I'll just, there's a little tiny bit there, a little bit there on the feet. It's only minor. Looking a little bit yellow, so I sometimes do a hue and saturation. I pick my yellows and I pull back the yellow a little bit and then mask that out. I'll paint it back in now just to take a bit of the yellow off. So I can use the yellow brush, but I tend to just like that. It's just a little bit that works. So what I'm going to do now is flatten my image. I still have a little bit of work to do. I'm going to do a soft baby skin layer. I try to pull back on it a little bit. So I've got it at 50% opacity. It's I think it's Kelly Brown's in one of Kelly Brown's action sets. It's basically a blur layer. Again, everything I do is just workflow related, so that will reduce my workflow by not having to do a separate layer myself. I just use her action sets. Well, the blue, reduce the blue is from her action set as well. So now then I go over here and just pull it back to nothing, and then I am bringing it back in. Oh, I forgot to say that last bit was that I was erasing, I wasn't at 100%, but I erase the softness off the bridge line of the nose, around the edges, the mouth, making sure that the eye line and the eyebrows have not got any softening on them. So you can see here, the softening is just in areas around the face. It's very, very minor. So what I'll do is flatten the image again. I feel like I need to brighten the side of her face just a touch. So I might just do a curves layer. I'll lift those curves, mask it off, and then paint back in with my white brush. Again, I want to just lift the exposure a little bit. Let's see. Do it again. Oh, it went wrong way. Invert, and then I'm going to paint back in. There we go. And I'll just, where I want to sort of feel like the pop of light's coming onto her there, because I want her face to be the hero of the image, so I really want to just make sure that that pop of light is hitting her. So when we come out, you can see how beautiful and bright that has made her in that area. I'll just get rid of that layer. I don't know what I did there. So you can see here how that's just what I want is the viewer to see exactly where I want them to look, and that is at her beautiful face. So I'll bring that just back a touch. I'm still picking a little bit of yellow in the highlights, so I'm going to do a color balance layer, choose highlights, and bring the yellow down a little bit in the highlights. There we go. So now the other one, sometimes I build in a bit of contrast. So I've got a contrast layer I've added there. I'm going to invert that and just paint it back in where I want it. So I'll just pop the contrast in some of these areas here, just so the image pops. So I'm really liking that. So what I'm going to do is flatten image. I'm going to give it a little bit of a hazy over, like a layer that I've got a few extra bits and pieces that I like to add on there. It's just a finishing touch. I'll put a bit of a soft, I only put a tiny bit on haze, there we go. And then another little thing I do is just do a little pop of saturation, and then I'll paint that back in to certain areas, sometimes if they need a little pop on the lips. Make sure I've got my white brush. Pop some pink on her lips. Might just pop a bit of saturation around here. Pop these colours. There. And then another one I've got is a little pop of pink cheeks. That's from Kelly's action set. Sometimes I just feel like you just need a little bit of extra colour, because again, that will give you a three-dimensional look. Can't really see that. It's very minor, but I kind of just like sometimes that. There we go. All right, so then I'll do a sharpness. Sharpen those eyelashes, their hairline. Don't really need, I mean, it just depends on the image, but I think I'm happy with that. So then sometimes I'll just go in and make sure I haven't overdone it. I'll bring it back and then bring it up to where I'm happy. There we go. I'm happy with that. So that one is done. So I'm going to save that one. There we go.